Hi everyone, my name's Natalie Birch. I am a Global Affairs Master's student at George Mason University. My research that I'm focusing on is media's impact on the commercial sex industry and how that has affected sex trafficking numbers across the globe. Um, my research, I'm kind of looking for funding through different NGOs as well as the United States State Department. So, as sex trafficking has become a more well known issue across the globe, considering many NGOs have taken steps towards prevention as well as many countries' governments. Some policies and prevention work has varied across the globe, but it's been seen that it hasn't solved the issue with sex trafficking in general. Many studies previously have focused on the legalization of various sex work, governmental policies regulating sex work carried out through the internet, and sex tourism, and how those have played a role in impacting sex trafficking rates. With that in mind, the rise of destigmatization of sex work and the commercial sex industry have made it a more common profession. I think that with that in mind as well, it's important that many of the younger generation has come to the understanding that there's a difference between choosing that line of work as opposed to becoming victims of trafficking. With the beginning of my research, I'm going to be starting out in Washington, D.C., where I currently live, in order to be able to interview different policymakers who have kind of been at the forefront of sex trafficking prevention. Um, After that, I will be going to Texas, where a large portion of the research I will be conducting will take place. The Texas law enforcement is largely versed in trafficking issues and prevention based off of the location of the 35 interstate, which runs all throughout Texas. That's known for being one of the largest human trafficking routes in the United States. And then, kind of following that, much of the sex work interviewing that I will be doing is near different universities across the state of Texas, kind of looking at Texas A&M, TCU, Baylor University, University of Texas, Texas State University. I think with that in mind, the main area of my research is focusing on the app OnlyFans, and that has become very popular amongst college students to allow them to be able to help pay for bills and living expenses. With the location in mind, we will be looking at how my research will be contributing to current literature that has been done on the topic of sex trafficking. Specifically, since it has become such a global issue, there is that understanding that it needs to gain more traction on a larger scale, especially as certain governmental policies are put into place. Sex tourism contributing to economic growth for many countries, as well as the use of the internet and its role that it has had in the commercial sex industry continues to evolve. The purpose and the proposed research will contribute to existing research that has been done by being able to grow kind of that understanding and that knowledge based off of the introduction of the internet, as well as kind of expanding the idea that with sex tourism and globalization, the effects of legalization and decriminalization of the sex industry, and how online technology has kind of contributed to all of that, especially with creating a safer environment for sex workers. So the ethnographic research that I'm going to be conducting will be largely based on the app OnlyFans, allowing researchers to further their knowledge on the effects of the online industry and media's contribution to the sex industry in general. For my first objective, I'm going to be evaluating new platforms that have allowed for kind of easier access to the commercial sex industry and the possible effect that that has had on sex trafficking rates. Following that, there will kind of be a further understanding and evaluation on how the new laws that have been put into place, specifically in 2019, have kind of helped with the regulation or will be helping with the regulation of phone applications that have allowed for easier access to the commercial sex industry. Kind of with that, an understanding that these new policies have created a possibility that the sex workers who have chosen the field will have kind of a harder way for them to create their livelihood because of the tougher regulations. The third objective is to examine the movement of the commercial sex industry away from cities with the influx of internet usage, understanding that with possible migration that could affect policing duties and regulations. And then my fourth objective will be to observe that with the movement onto online platforms, how that has allowed for an increase of empowerment for the workers and allowed for a decrease of a middleman or pimp. With all of that in mind, the main methodological components that I will be focusing on include, first and foremost, connecting with policymakers who have been involved in prevention of human trafficking and sex trafficking, and kind of understanding the separate steps that they have taken kind of to work towards that, especially when it involves the internet. The second component will be working with law enforcement that has been trained to acknowledge signs of human trafficking. Kind of this will be semi-structured interviews conducted in different precincts in different cities. Kind of the main thing is understanding how they work towards prevention, especially through the internet as well. And then the third component will be to gain the trust of sex industry workers who work through internet and apps, and understand the issues that they have come across with current policies through participant observation as well as semi-structured to informal interviews. One of the main impacts that this can have is to help policymakers understand which efforts that they have made have a positive impact on sex trafficking prevention, as well as help them work towards implementing policies that allow for better regulation of new technology and media that won't cost other sex workers who have chosen the line of work. It can allow like an impact in prevention work for law enforcement, kind of allowing for the law enforcement, policymakers, and NGOs to kind of work towards becoming allies with sex workers who have chosen the field and that line of work, as opposed to those who have been trafficked and forced into it. One of the bigger things that can be taken away is that this specific research can be applied in many cities across the globe, many countries, not just Texas. It can be used worldwide.